Hello, and welcome to Notes from a Wandering Mind. I'm your host, Acacia Lopez, and this is officially episode 1 of this podcast. Today, I wanted to take some time to introduce myself and talk about the creation of this podcast, and later in the episode, we'll dive into our first topic, which will be inclusive design. You're probably wondering who I am. Well, a little bit about me. I am currently a graduate student at the University of Iowa, getting my master's in strategic communication. I actually graduated from Iowa back in 2023 with my bachelor in communications and a certificate in event management. I've been working in communications and HR since then, but I went back to school in the fall of 2024 to start my current master's program. Outside of school and work, some of my interests are art, music, media, movies, Marvel, and gaming, as you can see by my setup here. I am very active on social media, maybe not so much as a poster, but definitely a consumer. I am obsessed with Pinterest. I could make an hour-long episode on my Pinterest and all of the boards that I have, whether it's fashion and home decor, DIY. I'm a huge DIY person. We will talk about that in another episode. Along with media and music, I also enjoy listening to podcasts. Some of my favorite podcasts, quick shout out, Unfiltered by Zane and Heath, The Broski Report, Brittany Broski, and Smosh Mouth with Shane Top and Amanda Leanne Canto. So glad to have her back. Speaking of YouTube, I definitely feel like an iPad kid sometimes. I spend my time on YouTube a little too much. It's probably one of my most used social media apps. I watch a lot of Smosh, Markiplier, Good Mythical Morning, and Dan and Phil. Yes, I still watch Dan and Phil, and I have been since the beginning, the break, and now. If I'm not on YouTube, I'm rewatching some of my shows that I've seen probably a dozen times, like The Office or Gilmore Girls. I'm basic and I know that, but it's fine. I like my comfort shows. If you're interested in learning more about my education or my work life, feel free to check out my portfolio website or connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll have links in my details on all of my episodes. That way you can connect. Over the years, I've worked on low-level media production and event planning, but mostly communications and marketing. In my undergrad, my main focus was event planning and television, so it's a little weird how I ended up in HR, I know. With a communications background, I've always enjoyed connecting and helping others in different ways, so it kind of fits. But before I even went to college, I wanted to be a music teacher. I was a huge band nerd in high school, and then I switched over to journalism my senior year. I really liked the writing and discovery aspects of everything, but apparently I suck at grammar and the technical aspects of journalism, so the communications school kind of had more of what I was looking for in the end. And really the part that I enjoyed the most was just connecting and getting to talk to people on different topics of any sort. Which is why I've named this podcast Notes from a Wandering Mind, because that's kind of what my mind does, day in and out. And I know I'm not the only one who does this, so I figured I'd find my people. My brain kind of bounces around from topic to topic, so often I forget what my original thought was, and I have to explain to people kind of how I got from point A to point F all of a sudden. So when I was tasked in one of my classes to create an audiovisual product, I took that as my push to create this podcast. The overall assignment is to demonstrate my understanding of inclusive design principles, which we'll talk about as our first topic today. But I wanted to take it a step further and kind of pursue something I've thought about trying for a while, which is creating a podcast. The space you'll see here is going to be my primary filming setup. I may move things around a little just kind of as we get comfortable, but for the most part, I'll be here. And I want this kind of to be a welcoming, casual space, but also feel like a podcast, hence the mic and setup. That way it's not like I'm sitting in the corner of my living room just talking to myself. We are going for a little bit of a mixture of like FaceTime with your friend and deep dive YouTube TED Talk, if you know what I mean. I want things to be kind of fun and chatty, but every once in a while I'll go into something a little more educational. So you'll see around me some of my interests that I mentioned before. I'll also probably have my iPad or my laptop with me for most of the episodes. That way I can kind of keep on track and get my thoughts out clearly and completely. Otherwise, I'll go off on a tangent. If I ever reference like an image or something I'm looking up, I'll definitely put it up on screen. And for my listeners, like audio only, I'll describe to the best of my ability kind of what we're happening. Now I'll be taking this a little bit seriously as it's a project for one of my final classes and I'd like to graduate from this program, but that doesn't mean that this is a serious podcast, if you know what I mean. We'll talk about, again, some more educational things that I'm interested in, and inclusive design is one of them after the semester that, I've gained a lot of interest in, and things I've learned over the years from different classes, both in my master's and undergraduate. But that way you can kind of learn something from these talks, even though most of the time it'll probably be a little more casual and leave space to talk about other things. The point of this podcast is going to be for those random days when I really can't stop thinking about a certain topic and I want to be able to get it out, whether it's something crazy from pop culture, like recently Whitney Levitt and Mark Ballas on Broadway. I love Broadway. I love those two. So that's a topic for another day, but the reason I've created this as more of an open chat is because I don't want to settle on one topic and change my mind later. I want this to be something fun, educational, and something you can listen to when maybe you can't get your mind to stop or running all over the place. I love a good podcast where they just kind of talk and I can just listen, and every week is different and the episodes don't kind of slow down. Everything's just kind of go, go, go. That's the pace that my brain kind of works at. So that's kind of my hope and goal here. Another thing I wanted to mention is that this is currently a solo production, but doesn't mean it's limited to that. As I progress and kind of see how this goes, we may have guests to talk about different topics with, maybe some of my friends and family, fellow enthusiasts I find. But trust me when I say every person that I know has a handful of topics that they could talk about for a while, so it kind of gives us plenty of ideas for future episodes. I want to try and make this a bi-weekly, but probably more of like a twice a month, early and end, or maybe both in the middle. We'll kind of see how it goes. So stay tuned for updates. If you'd like, you can sign up for notifications for when I post on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and eventually we'll be getting to YouTube. Don't worry. But with the introduction and background out of the way, let's kind of talk about inclusive design. As I mentioned, I'm in my last semester of my master's program, and one of the classes I'm taking is called Topics in Strategic Communication, and the focus is inclusive design and production for strategic communication. I'll say this is definitely one of the most engaging courses I've had throughout my program, simply because it is a very small class, like 2 of us, and that's the smallest class I've ever been in, especially in a graduate program, but at a Big Ten university, I don't think you'd find something like that. So I was definitely surprised, but it's actually been a great experience because it gives us a lot more fluidity, if that's the right way to say that, to kind of talk about things more openly and voice those opinions, because there's only 2 of us, so it definitely gives us both a chance to kind of, speak our mind. But I've been able to learn from people who work in inclusive design and consulting, even podcasting, and someone who graduated from the program who is a full-time poet, which is like a dream job. So every week has kind of been different, and I really like how much we've been learning. And we've been able to do assignments where we kind of research the person and their field. So I've learned more about podcasting and being an author and working for a museum. We talked to someone who does that. And then afterwards, we kind of reflect on what we learned and our overall mindset of what might have changed from our before kind of perspective. Now, for those of you who don't know a lot about foundations of or principles of inclusive design, I've got you covered with sort of a bite-sized version of what I've learned this semester. The principles of inclusive design are accessibility, equity, clarity, diversity, and predictability. The purpose of inclusive design is to create an enhanced experience for all users, which really just means making something more human-centered. And at the end of the day, I mean, we're all human and want to feel the same thing, to be included. So that's why inclusive design matters so much. And you may not even know it, but you're doing it in daily life. If you think about it, intersectionality plays a big role in not only inclusive design, but everyday life. In short, intersectionality is the overlapping of one's social identities, so gender, class, sexuality, but also your interest and experience. And that's what marketers and designers are going to look at the most. and how they overlap with one another. Because if you can find the meeting point of all of these lines crossing over each other, that's where you're going to find common ground, and that's where you're going to start this topic and conversation of inclusive design by giving people really just something to relate to. As a big thing that we talked about in our discussions was the process of something called perspective getting versus perspective taking. And you're probably thinking, well, what is the difference? Perspective taking is usually more of a cognitive and emotional process of stepping into someone else's shoes. You've heard that. Think about if you were to walk in someone's shoes, to understand their feelings and often try and build empathy. This is how normally people would react if someone were to tell them, what their feelings were and help them try and understand. However, what people need to do is perspective getting. This involves directly asking others to explain their viewpoints and understand exactly how they're feeling and reflecting on how that makes you feel. Because what you're trying to do is separate the feelings. This person is their own person with their own feelings. You are your own person with your own feelings. So perspective getting is the better option because now you get to understand two sets of feelings rather than taking someone else's and just making them yours to understand them, which you ultimately won't be able to do. The key differences are very important because this type of listening and communicating can help conflict resolution, and even child development and inclusive design if done correctly. You need to actively listen, not empathetically listen, even though sometimes I want to do the same thing too. And you need to learn what the other person thinks, not just hear their story and think of yourself in their situation. One thing to remember when talking about inclusive design is something called the inclusion paradox. The inclusion paradox is the phenomenon where efforts to increase diversity, equity, and inclusion can unintentionally cause more harm than good. Not to say that all DEI efforts result in this, but pushing too much too soon can cause discomfort, decrease performance, or often lead to feelings of exclusion or tokenism. Now, let's talk about inclusive design for strategic communications. That is my focus after all. So, why would we use inclusive design in strategic communications? With these principles, you can increase participation in your messages, increase awareness and engagement by reaching more audiences, and overall, you're going to create a more welcoming and opening space and environment for your professional or even personal communications. In our course, we learned about 5 tips to help with inclusive design for Stratcom. Number 1, understand your audience. Remember the 5 W's. Who is your audience? What are their needs? When are they using social media? Where are they getting their communications or on which platforms? And why are they on social media? And how are they using it? Number 2, make it easy to use. This one's simple. Use clear, concise language. Think about if your content that you're sharing requires prior knowledge. And as always, have a call to attention, call to action. Tell your audience what they're supposed to do or get from your message. Number 3, be inclusive of all abilities. Does your content have alt text, captions for videos, transcripts for audio? These things are becoming more and more common and kind of automatic features, as they should, but something to keep in mind. Number 4, use inclusive language. Another easy one, use gender-neutral language when possible, avoid stereotypes, offensive language, check style guides when you need them. And number 5, test and iterate your product. Even if this is getting a second set of eyes, make sure your message or product is good before sharing the end result. Kind of a common sense one. I mean, if it's that easy, if we can do all of these things or even just half of these things, think about how our communications can change. I still have a little bit of hope for our society, even if it feels like a roller coaster going only down on a lot of days. There's always a chance for change. Another big topic we covered was AI. I know, we're going to talk about AI and the involvement it has on inclusive design in many ways. When we talk about AI, there are 2 types of approaches that we want to think about: human-centered and generative AI. The key difference being that human-centered AI focuses on enhancing human capabilities and transparency. where Gen AI focuses more on automation and new varied content. When we train and use AI to create or assist with ideas, you need to be aware of algorithmic bias and ethical boundaries. Your choice of AI is going to build bias, whether you mean to or not, because typically it's only getting information from you and questions structured from your mind. So, in order to avoid this, it's good to feed it with information from a variety of sources and opinions, yes, even those that you're not going to agree with, because this will help us in the end to avoid bias, but also consider the ethical and moral guidelines to ensure that your technology is getting developed fairly, safely, and as transparent as can be. Some practical uses for inclusive design involving AI are strategic AI workflows, added diversity and data auditing, personalization and accessibility and content creation. So creation of personas, helping that perspective getting versus the taking, and even cultural checks. So cultural and linguistic checks for dialects and prevention of stereotypes when you're creating something for an audience that you may not be a part of or you may not be used to marketing to. And another one is visual and audio accessibility and inclusion. So checking for accessibility standards. Again, kind of that alt text or keyboard navigation, something you may not use every day. And AI has been really helpful in like those automatic transcripts and things like that. Again, always good to check your work, check what the AI is giving you, maybe reference a couple different AIs and tweak it from your own. But our end goal here is that with inclusive design, the content is going to be more accessible for all. Remember, when using AI for any sort of project, assignment, or whatever it may be, make sure you're aware of any legal compliances or for school rules that your, college, high school, whatever course you're taking has for regarding AI use. Now that we talked about what inclusive design is and how it kind of benefits everybody, let's go over some of my favorite examples of inclusive design in the real world. This kind of approach to finding real world examples was something we did a lot in the beginning of our course, and it really helped me understand what inclusive design was when I knew what it was, I just wasn't thinking like off the top of my head ideas until our teacher kind of gave us prompts to kind of go look for things in technology or in a brand or product. And so these are kind of some of the ones that I thought of during class from some examples I had, but also ones that I thought of to share with you guys today. So we know about transcripts, closed captions, curb cuts. I didn't know what that was at first. I didn't know there was a name for it, but those little divots in sidewalks with the bumps, curb cuts. Now you know. I did not know, so don't feel ashamed if you also didn't know. But things like that, and tactile paving also, again, at the end of those curb cuts sometimes. But a lot of brands and products or things you didn't realize are part of inclusive design, so something like that. And these are a few other examples. One of them is Rare Beauty. I personally love the Rare Beauty brand, not only because it is good, semi-affordable makeup, but the products and their overall brand message is so inspiring. Their product shapes and the holding capabilities and even their shade ranges are a perfect example of inclusive design. I have their perfume that has like the little squish at the top, but again, I've seen people use their palms for it, or people who can't necessarily grasp the like little, top that's usually on perfumes, and to see just such a small thing that, for me doesn't personally affect me, but for people out there, it's interesting to see how something so small but is so big. But I really like their branding, their marketing is a great example. Another one is Nike. Nike has a pair of shoes called the Fly Ease hand-free shoes. So they are kind of a slip-on, but a tennis shoe. A lot of slip-ons that you'll find are going to be like a Croc or a Hey Dude, something that isn't going to be meant for like athletic wear. And so Nike created this with that in mind. So maybe someone who struggles with laces or someone who can't bend to create a shoe on. Is again a great thing that you may have just been like, oh, it's a slip-on shoe. But for someone out there, that's a huge change. Another one similar in the fashion aspect, Victoria's Secret. Victoria's Secret and Pink have a campaign, the VS and Pink Adaptive Wear, They have magnetic bra closures, sensory friendly fabrics, fully adjustable straps, and uh, clothing wear, but they're still cute, colorful, and, sexy, but they're like normal products. Because I think a lot of companies, when they approach inclusive design or even disability, they kind of make it look like that, if you know what I mean. Like, if you look at certain products, it's like that was made for someone who has something, but like the way that Victoria's Secret did it is very discreet. That's the word I'm looking for. Discreet. And I really like that they have branched out from back in the 2000s when it was only skinny models on the Victoria's Secret runway. I mean, I loved watching those, but it's great to see how far they've come, even with their inclusivity. And something like this is a huge, like, game changer. Another brand is IKEA. IKEA actually has something called the Visibles line of 3 printable functional add-ons, like a handle grip or extension for those who have dexterity needs. So again, something that you may be able to make kind of a DIY at home, but a company is thinking about someone who has a dexterity need and actually just giving them a product instead of them having to DIY and just kind of deal with it. So this is like something huge again that you may not think is something crazy, just a handle extension. For someone out there, that's game changer. You'll probably hear me say that a couple more times. Another thing is the Be My Eyes app. So this is an app that connects blind users to sighted volunteers through live like FaceTime video to help with random tasks to help promote overall independence. So I've seen someone use this app on, I think it was TikTok, and it was a blind user, opened the app and someone popped on the video call and they were at the store trying to find a specific shirt that they were looking for. And someone had on the FaceTime was helping them, like, oh, that one is a blue, sort of a lighter, and like describing different visuals to them. If they found one, they were like, hey, I like this material, but does it have a giant graphic on it? I want something plain. They'd be like, oh yeah, no, that one has like a huge words written on it. And they'd be like, okay, help me find something else. So something like super good and like helpful for people with vision needs and assistance, because you wouldn't really think that that's something like I just FaceTime people randomly, but not everybody has someone who'll pick up at the drop of the hat. I'll text people sometimes before I call to see if they're available, but I just sometimes call someone up. Not everybody has people who will just answer right away. So an app like that where it does provide that is something really cool. Another thing, kind of with that visual sense, is the Meta glasses, visual assistance guides, and they look and describe, look and read. Something called Be My Eyes. I watched another TikTok where someone had gifted these to someone during, I think it was Christmas, and they were able to say, Meta, be my eyes, and, describe the person sitting in front of me. And they were like, it's a, white female with curly dark hair. And this person was like so excited to use it and be able to hear what was going on. And that's something who maybe someone who doesn't have like a phone, FaceTime, things like that, a little something you can kind of travel with easier and kind of see if you maybe don't like the social aspect of the Be My Eyes app. This kind of removes the social, but still gives you something to help with the visuals. Similar with the visuals, but on the hearing side, Apple AirPods as hearing aids. So I did this an assignment in another class talking about this, but back in 2024, NPR had shared a story on how the FDA approved some AirPods to be used as hearing aids through different software updates to help people with mild to moderate hearing loss as a step towards a long-term treatment. So, I think my AirPods have a thing with you can kind of turn a setting on to make things, you can kind of hear conversations a little bit louder. I think it's similar to that, but different software updates like specifically for this. The article was really interesting, and I suggest, looking for it, but I think there's other developments since then. It's been a couple years, but that's another really cool thing where I love the noise canceling on my headphones, but for the opposite, to like amplify sound outside, is super cool. Another thing that you may not think about a lot, but I actually use sometimes, is video game settings. So things for custom controls and control customizations, auto-driven gameplay, subtitle resizing, and even colorblind modes. I usually use like a colorblind mode or something to kind of enhance colors and subtitle resizing, because sometimes they are so small. And I don't know about you guys, but I hear better when I see subtitles. You know what I mean? Someone's got to know what I mean. And then something like auto-driven gameplay. I was talking to someone one time and they said something how they use auto-driven gameplay for when, you know, their kids are playing games with them, like especially something like Mario Kart, you know, because if you're going up against a little kid playing Mario Kart, you're going to crush them. But put something on like that, and it kind of helps them boost their confidence that they're doing so good. But another something that is inclusive design. And then Meta Horizon VR. You'll see I have my VR. Maybe you can see it. I don't know if it's out of frame. Meta Horizon VR is a connection space that began during COVID in the earlier VR development stages and became sort of an accessibility space for both work and community connections. So it's again that inclusive design that COVID kind of pushed a lot of people to do things like this. And one of the benefits, even though that was definitely a dark time, I was a senior in high school during 2020, so I am one of those people who still thinks about it. Yes, 6 years later, I don't care. It definitely took a toll on me in many ways, but I love my VR, and that's something that I've tried a little bit. Not Meta Horizon VR, the like connection space, but I've gotten in there and I've pulled up like my laptop screen, and you can like type on there, and it's just a different way of, instead of zooming, you know, like the boring basic zoom, it was another something just to kind of be inclusive and connect with people, but try something new. And kind of the last one I wanted to share is Starbucks. I love Starbucks. And their store modifications and trainings that they offer. They have lower lighting in a lot of their stores, shorter countertops, especially behind the bar, for like baristas who may be in like a wheelchair, or again, just shorter people working. They have also raised dots on their cups for size identification. I noticed that recently on the cold cups. I don't believe it's on the hot ones. And they offer ASL training, which I took ASL when I was in my undergrad, and I loved it. I actually learned from a few deaf professors at the University of Iowa, and they were super kind and super encouraging. I encourage anyone who's interested in ASL to, you know, look up resources around you, or even just download a guide. YouTube is a huge, you know, teacher, but make sure you're getting it from someone credited and not just learning random signs and going out there and using them. But also just learn, make sure it's correct before you try and share with others. You know, it's something we want to respect, but again, you can learn and be respectful at the same time. These are just a handful of the many products and companies out there that are incorporating more inclusive design into daily life or practice, but overall company purpose. And I think that will kind of end my rant here. I plan for this first episode to definitely be a bit shorter, just to kind of give you an idea of what it'll be like, some chit chat, you know, again, casual, educational. I'll probably alternate, you know, a couple chit chat episodes, then maybe one educational episode thrown in, and then some chit chat again. I'll try every couple episodes to find a guest, probably just my family and friends at first, and then maybe as it grows, and if it grows, we'll reach out to others and see if they'd like to join us. But for future episodes, definitely be longer. I'll try my hardest. 30 minutes at the shortest, probably 40 to 50 minutes at the longest. But yeah, that's it for this week's episode. If you enjoyed our wander today, make sure to hit follow so you don't miss the next deep dive. Thanks for listening, and stay curious.